saw this on social media. What's the over-under on when this gentleman gets called another black face of white supremacy, number 19?
I had to evacuate my home in California due to the fires. Now, fortunately, I have friends who I was able to stay with. But many people don't have that good fortune, and now many people are homeless, and some have died. This disaster was caused by multiple variables, and people have different opinions on which one should be weighted the most. Some have identified arson, some have pointed to climate change. But regardless of the cause, hopefully we can all agree that we have a great degree of control over the response. And the response has been well below what we actually deserve. And part of the reason why is because we have inverted our priorities and are focusing on things like diversity, equity, and inclusion instead of efficacy. And as a result of focusing on DEI, people have died. And in this video, I'm going to explain why. Last year, the LA Fire Department had its budget slashed by $17.6 million. In response to that, on December 4th, the head of the LA Fire Department, Kristen Crowley, sent a letter to Karen Bass, the mayor of LA, saying that they are not prepared for a variety of different disasters, including wildfires. Now, $17.6 million constitutes about 2% of LAFD's budget. But it's not about just the budget cuts, it's also about how they're spending their existing budget, because a significant amount, at least $1 to $2 million, was spent on diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. In recent years, critics have complained that LAFD is too white, too male, and has too much nepotism. Now, the nepotism is a fair claim, because if you're choosing people based on who they know, you're not necessarily picking the best people. And the desire to make LAFD's visual representation more representative of the racial and gender distribution in LA is understandable. But when we make diversity even a secondary goal when efficacy is the primary goal, then focusing on the secondary goal at all can get in the way of the primary. Now, this has been going on for a while. When the previous mayor, Eric Garcetti, entered office in 2013, he set a goal of raising the number of women in LAFD from 2.9% to up to 5% by 2020. As of now, the percentage is 3.5%. Now, the current head of the LAFD is Kristen Crowley, and here's what she had to say about her diversity goals.
She took time out of her already busy schedule to tell us about her vision for the department's future, one that includes a 3-year strategic plan to increase diversity.
People ask me, well, what number are you looking for? I say, I'm not looking for a number. It's never enough.
Now, you might not think this is a big deal. After all, who's going to get upset about wanting more diversity? But in practice, when you have scarce resources and you have a secondary priority, that secondary priority can get in the way of the first, especially in an environment where there's scarce resources and your department has lost $17.6 million in budget and needs to make sure that every dollar is allocated to the most important needs. You might even think that, okay, we can have diversity be first and merit be a tiebreaker, but that's not actually what's happening in practice. 3 of the top women at LAFD are all lesbians, and given the minority percentage of lesbians in the overall population in LA, the chances of that happening by chance and purely on merit are 1 in 64,000. Or near zero. Meanwhile, the head of equity made almost $400,000 in base pay when her job is primarily to focus on diversity when they don't have enough money to even effectively do their job. On top of that, the head of equity, Christine Larson, makes more than the second in command, John O'Brien, despite the fact that he outranks her. Now, it's all well and good to say that efficacy is your top priority and that you're not going to compromise on that, but the money reveals your actual priorities. Moreover, if you hear Christine Larson talk in this clip, you'll see where qualitatively they're actually focused.
You want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you. It gives that person a little bit more ease, knowing that somebody might understand their situation better. Is she strong enough to do this? Or, you couldn't carry my husband out of a fire, which my response is, he got himself in the wrong place if I have to carry him out of a fire.
Does that sound like the rhetoric of someone who is laser focused on saving lives to you? In addition to DEI taking critical resources away from critical functions, it also introduces a double standard. For example, only 27.9% of public school teachers in LA are men. Is anyone pushing for them to have equity? Only about 11% of nurses in the state are men. Is anyone pushing for them to be at 50%? And then women are equal, but we're not equivalent. We have different things that we're good at. And yes, I'm sure there are roles in LAFD that require more empathy and compassion, which women tend to be better at. But setting top-down goals like 5% of the workforce needs to be women is an inversion of our priorities. And what we need to focus on is safety first. On top of that, DEI infantilizes women and minorities, and it causes people to doubt whether any particular woman or minority actually earned their way and truly is the best of the best for their role. Now, to be absolutely clear, LAFD is not solely or even primarily responsible for this catastrophe. There are various issues with water management, like insufficient capacity to store water that we need in critical scenarios, or fire hydrants going dry and not having enough water in them. Part of this is just gross incompetence because in 2014, Californians passed a bill that allocated billions of dollars for more water storage capacity. And now, over 10 years later, we still don't have an additional capacity built because of overregulation. This is all happening while the head of LA Water and Power makes $750,000 a year, which is more than the President of the United States. It's also not just a state issue. Only 3% of the land in California is owned by the state. 57% of it is owned by the federal government. However, the state and the federal government do work together to keep it clear and maintained so that wildfires don't get out of control. But as I mentioned before, LAFD is just a microcosm of a macro issue, of our government and our politicians constantly focusing on what sounds good rather than focusing on what is good, like safety. And we can't just point the finger outward because the politicians are responding to the culture set by the people. If we as a people keep allowing ourselves to be confused and keep on thinking that having diversity is more important than efficacy and merit in our critical functions and our government that we're paying our hard-earned tax money for, we will keep on getting the same results. And while we're getting those results, we'll allow ourselves to keep on getting misled by Democratic politicians like Bernie Sanders, who exclusively focus on climate change, which is part of the issue. And yes, the climate is changing. We might have reasonable disagreements about how much of climate change is man-made and how fast it's happening, but it is happening and it's something that we need to all adapt to. But in the short term, while we're misallocating our resources because of DEI and inverting our priorities, people are dying. This fire probably wasn't preventable. We had some of the strongest windstorms on record, and in a sense, it was a bit of a perfect storm. But could it have been majorly mitigated? Absolutely. And having the best team available and putting our money in the best places available is a necessary condition for that happening. We as a people need to pay attention. We need to use our voice and our vote to incentivize politicians to do the right thing, not the thing that sounds good. Because in critical conditions, when the stakes are this high and we focus on DEI, people die.